Hannah, I hope you'll be able to join us from Israel. I don't know how that's going to work, but
Yeah, it works.
okay, excellent, excellent. We really don't want to say goodbye.
Thank you.
We're doing the first sikha of the project for this week, the one on Parshas Behar. This week is Parshas Behar b'chukosai. In this parsha, there is a pasuk about acquisition. Specifically, it talks about acquisition of properties in the land of Israel. And since the territories within the land of Israel were parceled out by Yeshua, when Yeshua led Bnei Israel into Eretz Yisrael, and so each shevet had a certain parcel. So when land was sold, it was actually leased. It wasn't sold, because in the year of Yovel, one of the themes in this week's parsha, Shemitah and Yovel, the Jubilee year, all the original territorial lines were restored. In other words, ownership of the land reverted back to its original owner. So that's the context within which the Torah speaks about acquisition. And regarding this theme of acquisition, of acquiring property or other fungible items, the Rebbe brings down halachos, laws regarding acquisition, and what we can learn in our avodas Hashem, in our spiritual service from this. Seif Aleph. Klal hu b'dinei kinyanim. There's a cardinal rule regarding acquisition or transactions. Ein adam makne davar sheloi bala olam. A person cannot sell or buy, can't acquire, you can't transact something that doesn't exist yet. that is not in this world. And therefore, if somebody sells the fruit of a palm tree to their friend, before there's even any budding, never mind ripening of fruit, so this person can renege, they can retract on the sale. Even after the fruits begin to blossom and grow, because the acquisition was, or the transaction was on something that didn't exist yet. So it's basically null and void. However, but what if a person sells the body or the principal property, not for it itself, but for the fruit that will come of it? Kigoin, for example, ilan lepeirosav. You transact a tree, but for the purpose of the fruit that will grow from the tree. In such a case, hadinhu, the halacha, the law about this is she'ein ze makna davar shelabala olam. So then in this case, it's not about transacting something that doesn't exist. Shehare haguf matzoi. The principal property does exist. In this case, for instance, the tree does exist. Umakne es haguf. So you're selling or you're transacting or you're acquiring the principal part, the tree, let's say, but for the purpose of peiros, a fruit that will grow later. And so there are halachos that flow from these rules. And like the Rambam writes, I'm sorry, no. However, there are halachos that deal with exceptions. So there's this paradigm, and the paradigm is that you can't transact something that doesn't exist yet. However, you could sell and you could acquire something that exists in principle. The property exists, let's say, and you buy the property, you sell the property, you transact it for the crops, or you sell the tree for the fruit that will grow later. Okay, so these are two halachas in acquisitions, in transactions. And now the Rebbe says, but there are exceptions. Like the Rambam writes in his codex, Shadin hekdesh v'din ha'aniyim v'din ha'nedarim einon kedin ha'edyot. That when it comes to a person saying that they're going to give certain things to the Beis Hamikdash, they're making it hekdesh, they're sanctifying these things. So let's say all the animals that will be born, all the calves that will be born of a certain cow are going to be given to the Beis Hamikdash as sacrifices, as karbanos. So if you do that, or you pledge to give something to poor people, or you make a vow about something that you own, then then the law is not like it would be in the pedestrian sense, bikniyase, when it comes to acquisition. Why? She'ilu amar adam kol ma shateled behemti yeg hekdesh. Let's say a person says, everything that my animal is going to give birth to is going to be sanctified for the temple. Etnena litzdaka, or I'm going to give it to charity. So although those animals that have yet to be born can't be sanctified because they don't exist yet, or that money that is yet to be earned doesn't exist yet, and so on and so forth. However, but the person is still obligated to fulfill their pledge. They're still obligated to fulfill their vow. Shenemar, like it says, the Torah tells us that everything that leaves your mouth, you have to fulfill that. Kloimar, this is to say, although when you're talking about the chefza, the item, it's true that you can't ascribe holiness, sanctification to it. You can't transact it. You can't sell it. You can't buy it if it doesn't exist yet. However, mikol makom chal chiyuv ala gavra lekayim dvarim midin neder. But on the person who made this vow or who made this pledge, they still have an obligation to fulfill their vow, their pledge. Okay, so we've had many sikhs at this point where the Rebbe parses the difference between chefza and gavra. So chefza is the item with which a mitzvah is fulfilled, or in this case, chefza is the item that's being transacted, and then there's gavra. Then there's the person and what obligation the person has. So the Rebbe says, so here you have an interesting situation where, yeah, you can't transact something that doesn't exist. But because this is a pledge that a person made, they have to uphold the pledge. And in the brackets, the Rebbe says, Umam Rambam. And the Rambam continues, V'hayil v'hadavar, and because this thing, imtziva adam kishu shchiv meira, I'm sorry, v'hayil, and because this is the case, v'hadavar kain, this is the situation. So im tziva adam kishu shchiv meira. So if a very, very very sick end-stage patient, somebody who's fatally ill, makes a vow, they command, va'amar, and they say, kol ma sheyotzi ilan zela aniyim, that anything that's going to grow from this tree, that's like right outside my hospital, or no, it has to be what they own. So they're very, very sick, and they say anything that's going to grow on this tree is going to go to poor people. Zachu bahen ha'aniyim. So it already belongs to the poor people because this person made a vow. Yesh ga'onim shechoiken al davar zeh va'onim she'ein aniyim zeichen. The Rambam says there are greats who have a different opinion. They differ with me, and they say that the paupers don't own these fruits. They can only own things in the same way that pedestrian acquisitions or transactions or sales can be made. And therefore, and therefore, even though this very sick person said, all the fruit of this tree will go to poor people, it doesn't belong to them, because you can't do that. But the Rambam says, Ve'ein dati noite ledvarim elu. But my understanding is not aligned with what they're saying. She'ein adam mitzvah haknais. He says, because a person doesn't have an obligation to transact their assets. They don't have an obligation to sell something. But v'hu mitzaveh l'kayim dvara b'tzedakah. But a person does have an obligation to fulfill a pledge that they made to tzedakah, oy behekdesh, or if they made a vow that certain things that they own are going to be sanctified for the Beis Hamikdash. This is just like a person has a obligation to fulfill an oath or a vow that they took. Okay, so far we have three different paradigms. We have regular acquisitions. You can't transact something that doesn't exist. Then you have a different type of acquisition where you take the principal property and you say that you sell it for the sake of the fruit or the crops that will grow. That can be done before the fruits and the crops come out or appear because you're selling the principal property that exists. And then we have a third type of thing that the Rebbe raises, and that is it's not your regular transaction. It's rather in the category of a vow, whether it's hekdesh, something that becomes sanctified for usage in the Beis Hamikdash, in the temple, or it's another type of vow, or it's an oath that you're going to give something to poor people. And in these cases, it's true that you can transact something that doesn't exist, but a person has an obligation to fulfill their pledges. They have an obligation to fulfill their vows, their oaths. And so in this respect, the crops already belong, the Rambam says, to, or the animals belong to whoever they have been pledged to. Okay. The Rebbe says, "V'hinei kfar nisbar kama pa'amim," and it's already been explained many, many times. Shekol halacha b'Torah, every law in our Torah, milvad teichna kipshutai, quite apart from on the pshat level, its literal level, yesh ba gam Torah hayra ba'avoda haruchanis. It also comes to teach us something in our spiritual service. Ubulashon HaRambam, and we had this last week also, the Rebbe cited this, like the Rambam teaches, that it's an eitzah. Every mitzvah is advice. Be'inyan shel tikkun hadeyos. It's every mitzvah is advice, is a help towards straightening out our thought process. In the words of the Rambam, Roiv dine hatera einon ela eitzes latakein hadeyos uliyashar kol hamaisim. The Eibishter gives us these laws to straighten out our mindset and to straighten out our behaviors. And so it is with what we are speaking about now. Prate hadinim hanal bikinyanim, the details of the laws that apply to acquisitions. Aleph, hachiluk bein hamoicha peres dekel ubein hamoicha ilan leperesav. First of all, cited above is a difference between a person who sells fruit from their palm tree, remember, before the fruit even budded, never mind ripened. And there's a difference between that and selling a fruit for the purpose of the eventual, selling a tree, for the purpose of the eventual fruit that will come. And then we have the difference, hachiluk bein din hedyet b'kniyasai, she'ein ada mitzuva lahaknois, and we have the difference between pedestrian acquisitions and transactions, and the person's not obligated in this direction. You're not obligated to enter into transactions regarding your assets, but we make a distinction between that, ubein din hahekdesh v'din haniyim, and the laws that apply to sanctifying your produce or your cattle for something holy, shebahem, or promising to give something to poor people, shebahem adam mitzuva lekayim tvarav. In this case, even if those things don't exist, but a person makes a pledge or an oath or a vow in that direction, they are obligated to fulfill what they said they would do. ולכן הוא מחויב לקיים דבריו גם כשהנידון הוא דבר שלא בא לעולם. And so in this case, even though it's true that you can't usually transact something that doesn't exist yet, but in the case of a vow, that holds because the person has an obligation to fulfill their vow, even on things that don't exist in the world yet. And all of these different distinctions and paradigms, kayamim ba'avoda haruchani shel adam l'kainai. They all exist in terms of our spiritual service to our master, Hashem. Base. And the Rebbe says that the truth is that in a global sense, in overarching fashion, hatoichen haklali shel avodas Hashem hu asiyas kinyan. The truth of the matter is that the main theme in all of our avodas Hashem, in all of our spiritual service, is about creating a kinyan, acquisition. Specifically, haknaz ha'adam es atzmai b'eskala shalei l'kotchebrichu. Specifically, it's about our transacting, our selling, our transferring ownership of ourselves and everything that we own to Hashem. Kach she'yeh nikar shehu v'chol rechushay oimdim b'rshusay u'beba'alusay shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When you look at a Jew, it should be recognizable. It should be obvious and plain that this person and everything they own belong to Hashem. Al yidei zeh, how does this become obvious? Al yidei zeh, shehanagasai b'maisa dibor machshava hi la'olam kefi ritzaynu shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How do you see that this is a person that has been acquired by Hashem, as it were, has transferred ownership of themselves and everything that they have in their life to Hashem? You see it in their actions, you see it in the way they speak, you see it in their thought process. V'yesh loymar, the Rebbe says in brackets, and we might say, shezehu diak lashon chazal, that this is the specificity in the terminology in the Mishnah that says, ani nivresi l'shamesh es koini, that every person has to say, I was created to serve my master. V'lo yezbairi, and not my creator. Ki al yedei hashimu shel adam, because indeed through serving Hashem, miskayim u'miskala inyan zeh shakadosh baruch hu kainai. So it becomes clear and obvious that Hashem is their master. And this idea that every Jew is an acquisition of God, this will be revealed and open and manifest in the time to come, very, very soon. As said in the promises concerning the redemption, b'yoyim hahu, on that day, Yeshayahu says, Yosef Hashem goimer liknais she'er amai. Hashem will acquire the remnants of his nation. Val derech zeh, and in like fashion, every single day in davening Nemar, b'meitzeis chameret Mitzrayim, am zu kanisa. This is the nation that you acquired. Now, I see that there were a flurry of messages, so I'm going to open the chat box. Tippa says, making me think of Chana pledging unborn Shmuel. Yeah. Does this relate to investing in a company? It definitely relates to saying that if my company, gets acquired and then it goes public and the stocks or the shares go up in price, I'm going to give you like a certain percentage. That would be, yeah, I think that would be an example of this. No, when you give you, so Elsa says, so when you give your word for business, it's breakable, but not for spiritual matters. No. When you give your word in business, it's not breakable, unless it's about something that does not exist yet. But if it's a matter of tzedakah to aniyim, or a matter of hekdesh, of putting something aside, taking mundane crops or animals and saying, I am going to give this to the Beis Hamikdash, then you can make a vow about something that doesn't exist, and you still have to keep it. It's not that you have to make a vow about something that exists, but even when you make a vow about something that doesn't exist yet, you have to keep it. I don't know, Tzippa, that these halachas are about business. And I don't know why somebody would invest in a product that doesn't exist yet. Like, I don't even know that such a thing exists in the world. I think it's more like somebody has a startup business and they're looking for investors, and they say to you, daven for me, or something like that. And if my investment, if my business is bought and I have investors and then it goes public and the shares go up in price, I'm going to give you 10% of what I make, let's say. That, I think that would be an example. But I'm definitely, I know nothing about halachas of business. Not my line. I know about potatoes and pasta. Okay. Ubikinyan zeh, sheyehudi maknes atzma lekadosh baruch hu, and in this acquisition of a person by Hashem, yeshnei oifanim, dargais. There are two ways in which this can happen. There are two levels: kinyan haguf, v'kinyan peres. A person can sell themselves to Hashem, as it were, either in terms of selling the principal property, as it were, or the fruit that will come. Let's take a look. Hachiluk ben guf leperes ba'adam. So first, let's understand the metaphor. The Rebbe says, let's unpack the analogy here. Guf hu nafshay v'gufay v'koicheseim koilel hasechel shebemoyach v'hamidu shebelev v'chol hakoiches koilel koyach hamachshava hadibor v'hamaisa. Okay, so the guf, the principal property, or let's say the tree, okay, is a person's soul, a person's body, and all of a person's faculties, including their cognition, their emotions, all of their faculties and their, let's just say, their abilities, their strengths, including thought, speech, and action. That's the guf. That's the principal property. Uperes hem ha'pu'ulos she'al yedei ha'evorim levushi ha'nefesh ha'machshavos ha'diburim v'ha'ma'asim shel ha'adam u'k'maimer chazal peirosav shel tzadik mitzvos u'masim tovim asher tzomchim min ha'seichel ha'midos v'koichas ha'adam. What are the fruit? They are the effects. They are the results through the limbs of the body, through the vestments of the soul, through the thought process, through the speech. They manifest in thought, in speech, in action of the person. Like the Gemara says, that the fruit of a tzaddik are mitzvahs and good deeds, and these sprout forth from our cognition and from our emotions and from our different faculties. V'zeu hachiluk ben kinyan peres lekinyan haguf ba'avodas ha'adam l'kainai. And now we're in a position to understand the difference between acquisition of fruits and acquisition of a tree for the purpose of its fruits, or acquisition of a field for the purpose of the wheat or the corn crops or the barley or whatever, and how this relates in terms of spiritual service. Kinyan peiros, peiroshay, acquisition of fruits. What does this mean in spiritual service? Sheyehudi makne l'kuchabrichu es kol ha'machshavos hadiburim v'maisim shaloi. Shehem ha'peiros shel ha'nefesh v'koichasev l'vasheha. This is a case where a person sells, as it were, so that Hashem acquires all of their thoughts, all of their speech, all of their actions, which are the fruits of their soul, the fruits of their abilities, the fruits of the vestments of the soul. B'chol elu hu nizar ad haktzeh ha'achrin shamachshava hadibor v'ma'aser shelo yiyu la'olam behetem l'ratzon Hashem. In all of this person is very, very careful to the extreme that all of their thoughts, all of their speech, all of their actions should be completely aligned with Hashem's will. Ubuloshan Tanya, and like the Alter Rebbe writes in the Tanya, B'negea ledargas haBeinoni, in describing the category or the level of a Beinoni, like Avar Aveira Miyamav. This is a person that never did an Aveira, V'lo yavar la'olam, and will never do an Aveira. V'lo nikra olav shem rasha afilu shah achas v'rega echad kol yamav. And you cannot apply the term Rasha to this person for even an hour, for even a moment of all of his days, of all of his lives. I see that Elza's saying you can buy an apartment before it's built. Yeah, I think that's probably different. Now the question is, why is it different? Because just like a tree might not give forth crops, the apartment might not ever be built for whatever reasons. So Elsa, I really don't know if I don't know any of the halachos around acquisitions, really.
It wasn't me, but it's still a great point.
Oh, okay. Whoever made the point, I can't tell who it is.
It's Alicia.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I don't know. If somebody knows, please speak up. Because I am sure that there are halachas about this, and I know that there are Jewish realtors and developers constantly selling condos and apartments in Israel or elsewhere, and people are buying them or investing. It is probably some kind of system where you give a certain amount of money and you only give like most of the money once it's built to a certain extent or maybe completed or something like that. But I don't
Just
know.
like banks do loans, and according to if you learn the pasuk, you're not allowed to. So
Yeah, that could be too, but I'm thinking, I think that there are people who are Shemer Torah mitzvahs and are very punctilious with halacha.
no,
who-
I'm saying you have banks, you get a loan from the bank. It's not that they're not over on halacha, but there are a lot of loopholes in these things that we're not aware of. That's all.
Yeah, I definitely am Aris Daraisa on all this, so, but I will ask. So the Rebbe says, so there's the paradigm of selling fruits. And then there's a paradigm of selling the principal property, let's say the tree, up from which the fruits will grow. So in the case of selling fruits, aval haguf etzem hasechel, but in the case of the person who's selling fruits, the tree, and metaphorically, their essential cognition, hamidas v'akoiches, their essential emotions, their essential faculties, loy nikna l'kuchabrichu. The effects, their actions, their speech, their thought process are acquired by Hashem. They're completely sold to Hashem. They're completely aligned. But their essential faculty of thought and their feelings and their other abilities are not. Their mind and their heart are not yet free of the possibility that they will have thoughts that are not aligned with what Hashem wants, bad thoughts or lusts for the wrong things. That will arouse in their heart and then go up to their cognition and then remain there, because they're not going to act on it, but it's still taking up space in their heart and in their mind. In this case, this is a person that has complete dominion over the Yetzer Hara. And therefore, they do not allow for these bad midas and for these desires for things that are not okay to emerge in actuality and to express themselves in thought, in speech, or in action. So that is the paradigm of selling the fruit, selling a tree for the purpose of the fruit. Then you have,
Are you saying that I just got a little confused. Which part belongs to Hashem and which part, like, are you selling?
in the Beinoni, the fruit, as it were, belonged to Hashem. But the guf, the tree itself, the power of thought and the emotions are not completely acquired by Hashem.
So the expression is fine, is perfect, but the actual essential tree, goof, is
Yeah.
like subject to.
It's subject to the possibility for something to go awry, except that this is a person who's in complete control.
And then going back to I'm sorry, to go back to the first paragraph, the Rambam says that's not allowed to sell just the fruit. You are allowed to sell the tree for the sake of the fruit, but you can't, or say purchase, but you can't purchase future fruit.
Correct. But the Rebbe now here, before he goes back to those different paradigms of acquisition, is just explaining what metaphorically is the fruit and what's the essential principal property. The kinyan haguf and the acquisition of the principal property would be like the avodas hatzadik, the spiritual service of a tzaddik. This is a person who transacted the essential mind and midas and emotions. And this is done by completely obviating the Yetzer Hara. As hara shebe'etzem hasechel v'hamidas harai shebelev u'dechol kaiches. This person has completely gotten rid of any bad that exists in their essential mind or thought process or cognition, and there are no bad emotions in their heart. And there's no ability for anything negative in their faculties. The only thing this person desires or craves or lusts are things that are good, things that are holy. And because he sells, he transacts the essential property, the seichel and the midas, l'kochabrichu, harei ha'per shaloi, machshava dibur ma'isa, knuyim b'derech mamela l'kochabrichu. So because his entire ecosystem is completely bereft of anything negative, he has sold the principal property to Hashem, as it were, his seichel and his midas. So therefore, invariably and automatically, his thought process and his speech and his actions, meaning the fruit, the result of our cognition and the result of the aspects of our emotions, are all going to be completely in alignment with Hashem. And so he doesn't have to wage battle constantly that his actions, his speech, and his thought process should not be contrary to what Hashem wants. Because in the first place, this person doesn't desire anything that's not completely aligned with Hashem. It's not even a possibility. And the Rebbe says, and this is one of the reasons why a tzaddik is called a servant of God. Because the paradigm of servitude in halacha and the Torah is that it's not just that this person sells their time to their master, but their person sells themselves to the master, their guf. Gufoi shala eved kanoi l'rabbi. The principle of their existence becomes an acquisition of the owner. Ubederach memela, and therefore we have the rule that kol masha kana eved kana rabbi, that anything that a servant buys actually belongs to their owner. They have no assets of their own because they are not an independent asset. Their guf, it belongs to their owner. Ubedugma lezeh hi avodas shel hatzadik, hamakne es atzmusay or mehusay gufa laHashem. And this is the paradigm of the avodah of a tzaddik, who transacts their essence and their nexus, and maybe you could say their core. I don't know the difference between atzmus and mahus. But like two words that bespeak the essence, they sell their essence, metaphorically, the guf, the principal property, to Hashem. Gimel, al kizeh yuvan teichen inyan ein adam makna davar shelo bala olam. Compares dekel b'avodas adam. So now we're in a position to understand the halacha that you can transact something that doesn't exist, like fruit off of a palm tree. What does this mean in terms of our spiritual service? So the Rebbe says like this: Misha eino oimei b'dargas kinyan haguf ela b'kinyan peres bilvad. So for a person who's not in the level of the tzaddik, who has sold their principal property, they've sold all of themselves, their cognition, their emotions, all of their faculties, their strengths, their talents, everything. But rather, they are in the paradigm of the person who sells the fruit that will come forth from the principle. Koloimar, that is to say, hu yachal lahaknais l'kochabichu rakas hamachshavos hadiburim v'hamaisim shaloi. He can transact to God his thoughts, his speech, and his actions. V'loi es haguf, etzem hasechel umida shebelev. But he's not on the level where he can transact the essence of his cognition and his emotions. Olav ladas. So this person has to know. Sheyesh b'koichei lishloit al yedei milchama, rak al masav diburav chulei shebehem hu oisek ata b'poel. So this person needs to know that they have the ability to control, to have dominion. True, it might take a fight, it may take a milchama, but they can do it on actions and speech which they are involved with now, practically speaking. Aval eina davar biyadei sheyuchal lahaknais ata davar shelo bala olam. But they cannot transact something that doesn't yet exist. Im yachlit ata, if they're going to decide now, sheba asid yasem ma'isa toif. Let's say, for example, they're going to decide that in 2 years, they're going to say every bracha acharena from a sitter, not by heart, let's say. Ein hu yotze b'kach shom kinyan. Zehu matzav shu yachal lachzar by. So you can't make, metaphorically, an acquisition. This is a situation where you can still renege on the transaction. Ki ein kan vadaos shahamasa sheba'asid achen ye'asa behetem l'ratzonai elyon. Because you don't have the assurance that in the future this will be done in alignment with God's will. You simply don't have that assurance. Shechein, why? Kevan shagufay eina kanu l'Hashem, u'mehusay v'atzmusay shel harahu b'takvay v'loy chalav v'halach mimenu me'uma. The Rebbe here cites again the Tanya, because this is a person in which the principal property, the guf, the essential cognition and emotions, have not been transacted to Hashem. And essentially, the bad or the evil that is still within him remains in its full strength. It has not been vanquished. It has not gone away. It has not departed from him at all. Therefore, Olav lihilachem b'chol pam mechadash b'yetzer shebeli b'yimeichei. So he has to constantly, once again, from the beginning, do battle with his Yetzer Hara in his heart and his mind. V'loi lahatir l'taiva u'lerotzen shalayetzer laredes v'lavai b'machshava dibor maisa. And he cannot allow a forbidden lust or desire of the Yetzer Hara to devolve and to come into his thought process or his speech or his action. Umemela, and because this person is in this process constantly, they're not rid of the possibility of something negative occurring. Yitachin shebeshah sheyavei hadavar l'dei pa'el yizgaber olav yitzrich rachman l'slan v'lo yaniach lahachlot ha'tov l'skayim b'pa'el. So it's possible that in 2 years his Yetzer Hara will unfortunately overcome them, and is not going to allow for the good resolution that they made to actually come into effect. It's true that they sincerely want that in 2 years they will say every bracha achrayna only from inside a sitter, but the possibility exists that that's not going to happen. So it's not a proper kinyan. Can always be retracted, can always be reneged upon. Dalet. Aval, afal pikein, but this notwithstanding, gam misha dayan aim bekoiche lifol as inyan kinyan haguf. Even a person who is in this situation where they don't have the ability, the strength to sell the guf itself to God, meaning there still exists the possibility that things will go awry. They cannot completely change and transform all of their emotions in their heart and all of their desires in their mindset, that they should be completely acquired by Hashem. Yesh biyadai etza ech lahaknes es peresav. But there's still another possibility. There's another halachic paradigm that was mentioned, in which case this person can still transact their fruit shaloi ba'u la'olam that still didn't come into the world. And what is that? Al yedei zeh shehu makne guf lepeirosav kigoin ilan lepeirosav. It's by selling the principal property for the sake of the fruit that will come later. Kiloimar, that is to say, hagam she'ein b'koiche lahaknes es haguf atzma l'kutshabrichu, even though he's not a tzaddik, she is not a tzaddikes, and cannot sell the principal part to God. Yachal hu lahaknes es haguf rak b'chol hanegea lepeirosav. But there is a halachic paradigm that we saw already in Seif Aleph, where a person can transact a field for the sake of the crops that will grow, or a tree for the sake of the fruit that will later emerge. And the explanation spiritually is as follows. Avodas shel habeinoni eina mugbelas lelevushe hanefesh bolvat. So here the Rebbe explains, again, based on Tanya, that in the Beinoni, even though until now we said that it's only the fruit that the Beinoni controls, right, metaphorically, the Rebbe says, but the truth is that the efficacy of the service of the Beinoni is not limited to only the external vestments of the soul, only to machshava dibor maisa. Hainu, this means shebechol pam shetayva v'ratzei mis'orim b'liba v'chulei harei hu loichem rak la'atzoris hispashtos hatayva v'haratim machshava dibor maisa. It's not the case that the Beinoni is limited to just doing like damage control or prophylactically getting in front of the problem. That's not the sum total of the Beinoni's avoda and the Beinoni's abilities. Ella, but rather, avodasoi pe'eles gam b'midos v'hasechel atzmam. But the work of the Beinoni actually affects his midos and his seichel. Kivan shehu koife v'ad she'oser roshim al kapanim gam b'negei la'asid es harash shebelibo u'moichei. Because it's like a muscle, and every time you work the muscle, so every time the Beinoni forces him herself to do the right thing, it makes a Roshem, it has an effect, it makes an impression, at least the Rebbe says, vis-a-vis the future. And it weakens the negativity, the Ra, that's in their heart and in their mind. Ukbir Rabbeinu Hazaken, like the Alter Rebbe teaches, Shebeshas hatfila, ma'ir habeinoni benafshe is avas Hashem, shetia bizgalus libai. That during davening, the Beinoni arouses in his soul love for God, that it should be revealed in his heart. V'zeh poel al rasha b'libai, sheyeh oz ka'adam sheyashen. And this causes that whatever negativity there is in the heart of the Beinoni should fall into a stupor, should be asleep, should be latent. V'oisa ava laHashem shebeshas hatfila, Ma'isira ba'adam roishem, asher noisen likayach v'toikev lizgaber v'lishleit al ra hazeh mis'ava taiva. And this avas Hashem that is awakened by the Beinoni during davening makes it leaves a roishem, an indelible mark on the person, gives them the power and the strength to overcome and to have dominion on the negativity that is in their system. Obefrat, and specifically, Kevon shemidas ha'ava shel habeinoni b'shas hatfila hi eslei be'emes asher svas emes tochen la'ad, and because the midah of love for Hashem that is aroused in the Beinoni during davening is a true ava, and about truth, it is something that will endure eternally. So because he has the power to arouse this level of love for Hashem, and in this way to cause the negativity in his system to go dormant, to go to sleep, as it were. And this happens b'shas hatfila midei yom b'yom, and this happens when the Beinoni davens every single day. Nimtza sheyesh leBeinoni shlita misuyemes gam al mahus va'atzmus hamidas v'choli shalei yitzhara. So this means, as a result, that the Beinoni has a certain degree of dominion on the essence of the negativity inside of him. In other words, before we said that the Beinoni only can control the fruit, as it were. And about fruit that doesn't exist yet, you have no control. But now the Rebbe is saying that actually there is another paradigm where you don't sell the prime property or the principal property itself, but you sell it for the purpose of the fruit that will come. And the Beinoni is likened to that. In other words, it's not just about fruit for the Beinoni, because in their Avodah, they're actually, to a certain degree, causing themselves to have dominion over the essential cognition and the midas, over the guf. So it's not like a tzaddik who completely sold their guf and everything will come from the guf to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but there's a semblance of such. And because the Beinoni has a certain degree of dominion over the essential midas of the Yitzhara, I'll call panim biyachas l'spashtuson peres, at the very least, regarding the way in which they will metastasize to the fruit, as it were, the machshava dibor maisa, v'loi nimna mimenu ela hashlita al etzem hamidas k'shela atzman. So the only thing that the Beinoni kind of is prevented from is having complete dominion over the cognition or the midas themselves. V'zeu inyan makne guf leperosev b'avodas ha'adam. And this is how we understand that paradigm of selling principal property, for the purpose of the fruit or the crops that will emerge thereof, and how we understand it in Avodas Hashem. Afilu kishe'ein adam oimid b'darga sheyesh b'yecholta l'shanos es etzem midaisav v'cholei shabalibai. Shaloi tienu loi taibas cholei klal. Even when a person is not on the level, when they have the ability to completely transform their essence, the essence of the midas in their heart, that they shouldn't have any taiva at all for something that's not aligned with Hashem's desires. Mikol makom yesh b'koichai lifoil kfia al midaisa v'chulei. But they at least have the ability to effectuate some kind of force over their midas. Al kolpanin b'chol hanegelis pashtus and guf leperesev. At the very least, as it relates to the way in which it will spread out or metastasize or infect the fruit, as it were, their deeds. Va'azai gam peresev hamachshavos v'adiburim v'hamaisim shel oy bo la'olam kinuyim la'Hashem b'yosef v'matzav shelo yavar la'olam. And that's why, at that point, their fruit, even though they have not yet budded, they don't exist. But the Alter Rebbe could still say about a Beinoni, lo yavar la'olam, he will never sin. Because the Beinoni has a certain degree of control. In other words, has sold the body, has sold the prime property for the purpose of the fruit. That means that he has some control over the quality of the fruit that will be forthcoming. Okay, I'm looking at the chat. It's like a life insurance company that sees having a regular exercise regimen as part of the assurance that you're investing in your health. Yeah, it's also why they weigh you and want a punctilious record of what's going on health-wise. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. What does it practically mean to sell a tree for the sake of fruit? Would that mean that in the winter, not fruit season, the tree does not belong to the purchaser? I think it doesn't belong to the original. No, oh, wait, let me think.
I'm just trying to figure out what is like, if I'm buying the tree or I'm buying the tree for the sake of the fruit, like what's the difference in what I'm getting?
I think you're not buying, if I'm understanding this correctly, you're not buying the tree forever. You're buying a season or 2 seasons worth of the fruit that will grow from that tree. That's the way
What I kind of suggested in my question, like, I don't know if it makes sense to say the winter, but like the time when it's not bearing fruit, it doesn't belong to me.
Maybe it does belong to you, but it's for the purpose only of the fruit that will grow eventually. The tree itself is leased, basically. It's acquired for a lease for the fruit that will come. I think. I'm not 100% sure.
Like a vehicle.
That's what I think it is. It's that the tree itself belongs to the original owner.
I can't like chop it down to build a house.
Exactly.
With
Exactly.
the tzaddik, I guess.
I don't even know that you could build a tree house in its branches.
But
But the fruit belong to you.
The tzaddik case, like selling the actual tree, you could do with it whatever you want. Hashem could do with it what he wants.
Exactly. They're Eved Hashem. Exactly. That's where the Rebbe brought down the idea of avdus.
Okay.
Hey, toichen hadvarim b'signon acher. To say this in a different way, in a different style. Aval pi she'ein kol echad yochel lagia l'dargas Eved Hashem shegufay kanui laHashem. Although not everybody can reach this exalted level of being completely acquired by Hashem, like a servant, where the principal property is acquired by Hashem. Harei kol echad mi Yisrael hu shaliach shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But every Jew is a deputy or is an emissary of Hashem. Asher yesh biyodei hakoiches lahashlim kavanas habriya lasas leisbar dir betachtonim. And every Jew therefore has the ability to bring Hashem's intention for creation of this world to fruition, and that is to make for Hashem a dwelling place in this lower realm. And why do we have the koyach to do that? Ki shlucho shel Adam ha'elyon. Kimoisai. Because halacha is that an emissary, that I'm casting about for the word, help me somebody, when you deputize somebody to do something for you, let's say to give a get, what?
Messenger?
It's not messenger, okay, but right now we'll use shliach. Then
Proxy?
the proxy,
Proxy.
yes, thank you. Yes, the proxy kamaisai becomes like themselves. Ukamaisai da mishaleach mamash. And that's why you could give a get through a shliach, etc. Commotion is bar come upon him, as it's explained a number of times. Sha'oifen hachi nala b'shlichasu, the highest level of becoming an emissary, a proxy, is ashaloizu b'vat shemaisa hashliach ayafilu koyach hasiyah shaloi misyachasim ela mishaleach. It's not only that the mission or the particular function that they've been deputized to fulfill for the person that sent them, or even their ability to do so, is related to who sent them to do it. Elo shechlolus mitzi osoi shel hashliach hi kemoisoi da meshaleach mamish. But rather, it's that the entire persona, their entire existence of the shliach becomes like the existence of the Mishaleach Mamish. Ubederach Memela, and therefore automatically and invariably, Nechshav Maisa Shaliach Kemaisa Mishaleach. And therefore, what the Shaliach does will be reckoned as what the one who sent them did. The Frierdiker Rebbe once told my Zayda, he sent him on a certain mission. He was quite young, and he said to him, listen here, if you're going to do the right thing, you're going to be credited. But if you're going to do silly things, if it's going to go awry, it's going to be my fault. So make sure this goes right. Basically, I'm deputizing you to take care of this, and don't do anything, don't do shtusim, because then it's going to be on my cheshbon. It's going to be.
It's like Moilech Melech Ba'ashpa.
Yeah.
When you do something, it's a very heavy responsibility.
Yeah. Now, in brackets, the Rebbe says, Ella she'afal pikein ein ze b'doime la'evet. But even this highest level of a shliach, where it's not just that particular mission, or it's not just that their faculties or their ability to do things become related to or reckoned as the one who sent them, still, even when you're on this highest level, it doesn't compare to an evet. Shahareya evet einoi mitzias b'fnei atzmei kol. Kol gufei konoi l'rabbi. Because an evet doesn't have any self-standing existence. No independent existence. They're completely sold to their owner. Masha enkein hashliach, in contradistinction, the shliach, afilu ba'ofen hanala b'yoytze sheb'shlichus. Even in the highest level of shlichus, shashliach atzmai v'loi rak ha'maisa oikoyach ha'asiyah shaloi, the shliach themselves, and not just what they're doing or their ability to do, who kemoisa de meshaleach mamash. So everything about them becomes like the shliach, but still, but still, this paradigm is only vis-a-vis the idea that they're doing a shlichus. It's like you're selling the tree for the purpose of the fruit, but that purpose doesn't that person that acquires it doesn't acquire the tree. Like Sepa said, you can't cut it down to build a house from it. So, in the shlichus, loy b'nagei l'sharon yanav. Even on the highest level of shlichus, it doesn't include everything else. But an Evet, it's all consuming. It's all inclusive. There's no independent existence. ונמצא שכל אחד ואחד מישראל יש בידי הכוח למסור את כללות מציאות לקודש ברוך הוא. Every Jew has the ability to completely devote the entirety of their existence Hashem, liyashliach Hashem lahashlim kavanas habriya, to be an emissary of Hashem, to bring to fruition the intention for the creation of the universe. And through this type of acquisition, at the very least, the acquisition of the tree for the purpose of the fruits, nasa b'derech memela kol prate asiyisa v'dibur machshavisa behetem l'roten ha'mishaleach knuyim laHashem. And in that way, automatically, all the details of their actions, their speech, their thought process, all are completely aligned with the Mishaleach. They become acquired by Hashem.
Sorry, can I just, is the idea that where the Rebbe says Klolos Metziosai it becomes like part of the Mishaleach, of the Shliach becomes part of the Shliach, is that, am I understanding correctly that that's similar to the way that like the actions impact the principle, like almost like you can change your heart through what you do, right? Is that what it's saying? I'm not sure I'm following. Is that what it's saying?
You're asking if the Rebbe is comparing this to the paradigm of the Beinoni that he explained earlier.
Right.
I think so. I think that's what's mashma. That the Rebbe is saying, oh, you might think to yourself, I'm not a Beinoni. I'm not on the level of a Beinoni. So the Rebbe comes back and says, no, but every Yid is a shliach of Kodesh Baruch Hu.
So when you act in consonance with what Hashem wants, you're actually activating this part of yourself where you now transform your essence into something that reflects what Hashem wants. Is that correct?
Correct. So in other words, you might not become an Eved that's kanui l'rabbi like a tzaddik, but you could achieve the highest level of shlichus, which is that it's not just the mission, it's not even just the aspects of your persona that are capable of fulfilling the mission, which is why you were vested with the mission, but it's that all of you is aligned with the mission. Vav. And here, the Rebbe brought down in Sif Aleph, the Chiddush of the Rambam, a new aspect. Asher din hektish, eina kedin hahedya b'kniyasei. She'ilu amar adam kol ma sheteled behem tiyeh hektish. So the Rebbe brings down, that the Rambam cites in his halachas that there is a third paradigm that has to be considered here. That's not like the pedestrian acquisition. And that is a case of a vow or an oath or sanctifying something. So either making it hekdesh for the mikdash or making a vow that you're going to give it to aniyim, to poor people. He says, She'ilu amar adam kol ma sheteled behem tiyeh hekdesh. Chayav l'kayim devaros. If a person says that all of the calves, all of the yearlings, whatever, are going to be born from this particular animal are going to be hekdesh, the person has to fulfill their word, even though there is a halacha that you can't make an acquisition of something that doesn't exist yet. Why? Because mitzad gavra, because the person themselves has a responsibility to fulfill their oaths. So Rebbe says, so now let's apply it to what we've been discussing in terms of spiritual service. He says like this: Yeshmi she'ena aimed afilu b'madrega sheyuchal l'kayim es kinyan haguf l'peiraisav. There are such people that are not even on the level that they can transact the tree for the purpose of the fruits that will grow, the principal property for what will come from it. Ein lo shum shlita al guf midaisav. They're not like the Beinoni, and they have no control, they have no dominion over the essence of their emotions, afilu lo yal hamidas b'shaychus l'peirosev, and not even insofar as how it's going to manifest in terms of their actions. Kach shelachayra ein biyadei klal lahaknes peirosev. So it would seem that they have no ability. It doesn't exist. The pairs don't exist. They cannot transact something that doesn't exist. It's shaloi bar lo'ilam. Umamela b'chol asiya b'chulei olav lahashiv michadash mechama keneged hayetze kedei shetiya asiya keratzen kainai. This is a person that it's day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, action by action. They're not spiritually evolved to the point where you can hope that automatically what their output is aligned with the Ratzon Hashem. Okay. But the Rebbe says such a person shouldn't say, oh, well, this doesn't apply to me, because there is this third paradigm. Aval bamed devarim amurim kasher hanidun hu knias hedyet. So this would only be true if you're talking about pedestrian transactions. Shein adam mitzvah lahaknais. And a person doesn't have a mitzvah to engage in transactions. Okay? So if it doesn't exist, they can't sell what doesn't exist. Kiloimer. Divrei harishus shel adam. So the Rebbe says now, further, like drilling down in the metaphor, okay? So what does it mean? Ein adam mitzav lahaknais. Remember earlier, the Rebbe cited that a person doesn't have a mitzvah, they have no commandment that they have to involve themselves in a transaction, but they do have a commandment that they must fulfill what they vowed. Okay, so the Rebbe says that this could be metaphorically compared to divrei harishus shel adam. In regular pedestrian affairs of a person, it's true. A person cannot make a vow that will hold credibility and hold up in court, as it were, metaphorically, about what doesn't exist yet, about what they haven't done, about what they're going to do in the future. But when it comes to sanctifying animals or crops for a holy purpose, okay, so the Rebbe says that would be in the analog, hachlotas tovas binyani terem mitzvahs, making resolutions, good resolutions in terem mitzvahs. Shabahem hu mitzvah l'kayim devorav. When it comes to sanctifying things, you have an obligation to fulfill your words. It's true that halachically, there's no acquisition in the chefza, in the item. A person cannot transact something that is out of their dominion, out of their control, doesn't exist in the world yet. But it is true, chal chiyuv ala gavra. But they have a chiyuv, they have an obligation. Ha'adam, umemela hadavar kol gam siyuv nesinas koyach ve'ezer lekayim devorav. A person has an obligation to fulfill their vow that's made for tzedakah or for sanctifying something. And the Rebbe says in the parentheses, and because they have the chiyuv, because they have the obligation, therefore, this also includes help and Hashem vesting them with the ability and the assistance to fulfill that vow. The Rebbe says, now let's unpack that in spiritual service. Divrei harishus shel adam kishurim biikram leteva. If we were talking about pedestrian transactions, business, no, you can't transact something that doesn't exist yet. So in the analogy, pedestrian aspects of our life are in the main connected to teva. They're connected to nature. Gufay v'nafshay habahamis. They're connected to the nefesh habahamis. Hamis avalehem mitzad kiyuma v'chayusa. That desires all kinds of things because that sustains it. That's its life. Ella shanefesh alakis yechola lifa shamasim ya'asu l'shem shamayim. but the Nefesh Elokis is able to affect that the fruit, that the maisim, that the results should be done l'shem shemayim. Okay, again, a kinyan of guf l'shem peres. Aval gam la'achar mikein nisharim divrei harishus ma'asecha shel adam. Divrei harishus hainu pu'ula shemitzad guf. But after all is said, they still remain pedestrian. They still remain your maisim, your actions. These are the parts of our life that are divrei rishus. We don't have an obligation. They're just the stuff we do. We eat, we drink, we sleep, etc., etc. But juxtapose this against something completely different. In Yonei Torah mitzvahs, the aspects of Torah mitzvahs, from the very get-go, they are actions that belong to the neshama. But the Yetzer Hara tries to stop, to prevent the person from fulfilling this. Divrei Rishus is coming milachatchila from the Nefesh Bahamas. And the Nefesh Elokis can weigh in and hopefully try to redirect. But mitzvahs, Torah mitzvahs, that's coming milachatchila from the neshama. The Yetzer Hara's job is to create an impediment, to create a blockage. V'asiyas ha-mitzvah, hi al yidei zeh she'haneshama koifes ha-yetzer. So the fulfillment of the mitzvah comes from the neshama forcing the Yetzer Hara, ad she'tashash yitzray, until the Yetzer Hara is weakened, kedei shehi haneshama tuchal l'kayim es ha-mitzvah, in order that the neshama should be able to fulfill the mitzvah. V'zehu tam hachiluk bein hedget lahekdesh. And now this allows us to understand more deeply the difference between a pedestrian transaction and a vow or an oath that is made for holy purposes, for sanctification. When a person takes upon themselves resolutions that have to do with divrei rishus, Exhibit A. How many millions of times I have taken resolutions upon myself about what I'm going to eat, or more precisely, what I'm not going to eat. That's knias hedyet. That's a pedestrian transaction, and therefore it's dubious what the future holds in the extreme. So because these are in the main actions that have to do with the body, the nefesh bahamis, and a person does not have dominion over their body and the nefesh bahamis, so you're not talking here about an obligation or about subjugation, because it's not, these things have not occurred yet, so they're not in your dominion, they're not in your ownership to sell. But in contradistinction, when it comes to holiness, Torah mitzvahs, Torah mitzvahs are in the main the actions of the neshama. They exist. They are in your ownership because you have a neshama. The only thing you have to do is take away the disturbances and the interference of the Yetzer Hara. So when the neshama takes achlata teva, that already obligates her and subjugates her to fulfill this achlata. Hakna b'poyel b'chefza shel hasiya einu yichayla liyos. It's true. You can't transact on the chefza, on the action. Ki hayetzer hara olo lafriya b'kach. Because although it already belongs to the neshama, and the neshama is already subjugated, But the Yetzer Hara exists. The Yetzer Hara is a player. The Yetzer Hara can interfere. Umemela ein kan vadash hadavar yava l'dei payel. And so there is not the assurance, the 1,000,000% assurance that this will happen. Aval legabe haneshama, but from the perspective relevant to the neshama, ma'acha shehi mechuna b'tiva l'kayim es inyane b'payel, but because it is in the nature of the neshama to fulfill Torah and mitzvahs. That's how the neshama is hardwired and soft-wired. Mikivan shehem pu'ula shala v'arei b'shuso b'alusai, because that's the neshama's territory. It's in her dominion. It's in her ownership. Chal aleh chiyuv v'shibud l'kayim dvarav v'av she'hadavar adayin le'bala olam chutz himena. And so therefore, it's like the hekdesh. It's like the money to aniyim, to paupers, to poor people. She has to fulfill the promise, even though it doesn't exist yet, as it were, outside chutz heimena. It exists within the neshama, but it doesn't exist outside. B'tzivui v'chiyuv sheb'Torah. This is the second time the Rebbe is saying this, that when the Eibishter gives us a command, when the Eibishter obligates us towards something, that comes with help and assistance from above. That the neshama will be able to overcome the impediments that the guf puts in front of her. Will be able to fulfill her resolution literally and practically. Zayin. Behiratzin may be Hashem's will. Shal yidei ha'esek behilches kinyan. Niske bekarav mamish lekiyum hayud b'yayim hahu Yosef Hashem liknais eshe'er amai. May it be Hashem's will that through us involving ourselves in the learning of the laws surrounding acquisition, we should very, very soon merit to the fulfillment of the promise that on that day when Mashiach comes, Hashem will acquire the remnants of his nation. V'yikuyim mashanemar ad yavar amcha Hashem ad yavar amzu kanisa. Again, what we say constantly, that Hashem that we are acquired as a nation by Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu yiknes amay b'shleimos. Hashem will acquire us in total. V'alidei zeh gam esher hakinyanim shakana HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'lamay. And in this fashion, also in the footnote, the Rebbe says that there are 5 things in Pirkei Avos that it says Hashem acquired. Ad lekinyan de Beis Hamikdash kinyan echad, until the acquisition of the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi sheyibane b'mheira v'yameinu mamash, that it should be rebuilt speedily in our days. And if you want to look at footnote 54, on the words ulakayim es hachlatasa b'maisa b'payil. So the Rebbe says that because there's an obligation of the Torah, there's a commandment, so we get assistance from above, that the neshama should be able to overcome all of the obstacles and should be able to fulfill it. So in the footnote, the Rebbe says, Re'eh, from the Tzemach Tzedek, miyad shenimshach koyach v'oiz mamayla liyas ozrei bevadai yugmar hakinyan. Immediately, there is help that flows down from above to help the person, and for sure they will complete that acquisition. And if you skip the parentheses, v'hayel v'hadavar kain imtziva adam la'aniyim zachu behen ha'aniyim, and drilling down on this idea that if a person commands, I guess, to their ears, that this and this will go to poor people, so immediately it actually belongs to the poor people. Shemi pashtus haloshem mashma. So from the terminology, it's understood. Shemi kevan shenischayev hishkiv mira no, am I saying that correctly? The fatally ill person on their deathbed. Shechiv meira. So okay, so because nischayev hashchiv meira lekayim nidre, because the person who is fatally ill, who's on their deathbed, they are obligated to fulfill their oath. Zachu behen aniyim. V'lo rak sheyesh kiyuv ala yisoymim l'tein lahem. In other words, it's not just that the ancestors, that the yisoymim, please help me here, I'm losing the word.
Orphans.
The orphans. It's not just that the orphans are obligated. It's miyad zachu. The point that the Rebbe is making by bringing down the Tzemach Tzedek is that it happens invariably, automatically, and immediately, and seamlessly, that mitzad the neshama, the promise has to be fulfilled. Whoever thought that laws of acquisition could be so interesting, so beautiful, so relevant, so poignant? Only our Rebbe can do this.